Okay, kids, this is day 2 of these wonderful recorded lectures, which I know you guys are going to go home and watch over and over and over again. Like at night when it's hard for you to go to sleep, you're going to say, I'm going to put Mr. Touloustic on his YouTube channel and just listen to his wonderful melodic voice, and it's going to soothe me to sleep. Anyway, probably not, just kidding. So here's the Thursday lecture for you guys. Just a short one, 20 minutes or so. So let's get going. Last thing we talked about was the first battle in the Civil War, which was the Battle of Fort Sumter that kicked everything off. And we also talked about technology and how devastating the battles were as far as deaths and the destruction, the amount of destruction that happened during the Civil War. And the reason, or the role that technology played in that whole deal. So we've talked also about how both the armies, the Confederate Army and the Union Army, were both in the process of building themselves up and, of course, waiting for the right moment where battle was going to take place. So the armies start being called up in December and January, December of 1860, and then January of 1861. But if you put together an army, you've got to train them. And so the guy who was originally put in charge of the Union Army was I can't even remember his name. Winfield Scott. But he was old. He had trouble getting on his horse by himself, and he was extremely overweight. And so ultimately, when it came to leading the Union Army, this fellow right here in the middle of this slide, the full body picture, that's Irvin McDowell. So he was put in charge of the Union Army. And he was in charge of training as well as the general in charge. And so all of the armies from the various states came together into Washington, D.C. to receive training and basic training on how to work together, how to march, how to do formations in the field, how to fire your firearms in command and things like that. And so there's been training from January all the way to January of 1860 to July of 1860. And so you've got this huge army in D.C. and they're training, and the thought is how long do you have to train before you go to battle? Well, there was pressure on this Union Army in D.C. to go to battle as soon as possible. And so that's what they were sent to do. Irvin McDowell, the general in charge, was not confident that they were ready to go, but they were told specifically that you're going to be ordered to march out, and so you need to. And so July 21st, 1861 is when the Union Army left Washington, D.C. for Manassas, Virginia. And specifically why Manassas was picked is there's a railroad junction. There are different railroads that come in from different areas of the South into Manassas, and so if you control that junction, you control movement into all those different states in the South and throughout the South. And so the Union Army wants to control that junction and be able to use it to their advantage, and they don't want the Confederacy to be able to use it to their advantage, which they were at that point. And so they knew they had to defend it, so there was an army there to defend it as well. The Northern Army outnumbered the Confederate Army by 8,500 people. And so there was a thought that there was no way that the Confederate Army is going to win this battle. They thought this would be the only battle of the Civil War. That will ultimately not end up being the case at all. So at this battle, it's ended up being called the First Battle of Bull Run. Bull Run is a river or a creek that runs through the area of Manassas, or just to the north of Manassas. And the battle happened along Bull Run Creek, and so that's why it got its name, the Battle of Bull Run. Now, it will not be the only Battle of Bull Run. There will be a second Battle of Bull Run later on down the road. But this right here is the first big battle in the field, open field battle of the Civil War. And as thought, the Union Army pretty much had the Confederate Army on the run. There were people that were so confident and so oblivious about how war actually is and how devastating this was going to be and how many people were going to be killed, that there were people from D.C., and Manassas is only about 20 miles from D.C. So there were people who came out of D.C. on a Sunday when this battle was going to take place, And they literally had like picnic lunches, and they were setting up lunches above the battlefield. And they were sitting on these blankets and ready to just watch the battle and have a nice lunch and have a nice afternoon and watch the Confederacy get beat, is what they thought. Yeah, it didn't work out that way. And also, if you know anything about battles, battle lines can change quite often and migrate into different directions. And so at one point during the battle, where these people are set up for their lunches, the battle will swing in their direction, and the lines will swing in their direction, and they'll end up having to leave everything there. And they'll be overrun by the Confederate Army and run out of that area. And so even when the battle was over, there were people that were picking through the lunches that they left behind, Confederate soldiers finding stuff to eat. But that's how naive and out of touch people were with war. Okay? And so really what was the defining moment of the Battle of First Bull Run was the entrance of the 1st Virginia. They come on the battlefield, and they're led by General Thomas Jackson, and that's the picture of him on the right there, of the from the chest up, my right when I'm looking at it. But when they show up on the battlefield, the Confederate Army is pretty much being beat and pushed back. Jackson was a guy who led his troops from the front, and so that's what he did. He was even injured in the battle during the fight because of his closeness to the front of the lines. But those Virginians, they hold, they do a charge on the outside line, on the right side of the line, and they're able to hold that right side of the line and able to start pushing back the Union Army, which then they start swinging around the Union line, which then the Union then has to retreat off the battlefield because of the fact that they're being surrounded. And so General Jackson earns a nickname during the first Battle of Bull Run, and his name is Stonewall, because he and his Virginians stood there like a stone wall, unmoving, unbending. And so that's how General Jackson got his name, and he became one of the most famous generals of the Civil War, and like General Lee's right-hand man in that process. So this is just to give you an idea of some battle things. You can pause this and get an idea. You got Washington up here in the top right corner. You got Manassas Junction right down here. I can use my mouse to show you. So this is Manassas Junction right here. So they're marching out of D.C. and following these roads through Alexandria down into Manassas. And the battle ends up happening right above. Okay. So you can see the Bull Run Creek running through there, and on the bottom here, and then you see the red lines, which are the Confederate lines, and the blue lines, which are the Union lines. And you can see General Jackson up here on Henry Hill, and that's the right side of the line that they were able to hold, and then able to move down on, and able to enable the Confederacy to basically snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. And so if you're interested in this, I mean, I could spend a lot of time talking about battlefield tactics and things like that, but I'm sure that you're less interested in that. Now, after that happens in July of 1861, there's a few battles here and there, but no big battles until the Peninsular Campaign of March to July 1862. Now, Richmond, Virginia is at the top of a peninsula, and you'll see it in a picture right here. So you see where Yorktown is, and then there's this York Peninsula here, and then you've got Richmond at the top of the peninsula. So here's Richmond where my mouse is, and then this peninsula right here. So you can see the plan is to come out of DC right here, and then come along the coast, and then get here on the end of the peninsula, fight their way up the peninsula, and then capture Richmond. And so this is going to be a series of battles. It's not just going to be one battle. And so the general that was in charge that failed ultimately at the Battle of Bull Run was relieved of his duties, and this fellow right here was put in charge, General George B. McClellan. Okay, all right. So I'm running out of time here, so I'm gonna have to do a part 2 to this, and so stay tuned, and I'll be right back.